This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Morning, it's 3 minutes after 10. It's budget day, which I suspect the most important element of that is the fact that I get to clock off early and hand over to Sheila Fogarty at approximately 12:30 when we expect Rachel Reeves to get to her feet in the House of Commons. Before that, of course, PMQs. All of which we will be taking live. The final exchange between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. The Conservative Party will have a new leader by this time next week. In fact, by Saturday tea time. And we'll take the budget live in its entirety, and that will be followed by expert analysis by a variety of qualified commentators who will be joining Sheila Fogarty to talk you through the key themes and possible revelations, although, like the Speaker, I'm somewhat dismayed by how much gets leaked long before the Chancellor gets to their feet. But we will be delivering that, as usual, on LBC from 12:30 onwards. Do you know, I always forget, every year I do this. Every year I think to myself on the way in, as I sit on the bus, I think, I must check that when I get in, because I don't want to sound ignorant when I get on air. I know what you're thinking, plus ça change. But there was a Chancellor, not that long ago, who got fired because one detail of what was due to come out in his budget got released to the media. And that was a sackable offence, or at least a resignation issue, one or the other. It doesn't make much difference in the great scheme of things. And just contrast that with where we are today, when there have been budgets in the not-too-distant past where you went into it knowing more about it than you did coming out of it. And speaking of expert commentators on the subject of the budget, let me steer you immediately to developments yesterday in the pursuit of the suspect accused of murdering 3 girls in Southport. He has also now been charged with possessing terrorist material and producing the highly toxic poison ricin. Now, a word to the wise. The reason why we use words like Southport suspect charged with terror offence and producing ricin, we may use his name. In fact, I'll remind you of it now. Axel Ruda Cabana will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court today, charged with producing ricin and possessing a document titled Military Studies in the Jihad Against the Tyrants, the Al-Qaeda Training Manual. It's a sort of American Army analysis of an Al-Qaeda training manual, which will also contain the full text of an Al-Qaeda training manual. And we mention words, or we use words like suspect because of contempt of court. We have to be incredibly careful to not influence the trial as and when it happens. I'm struck this morning by 2 recent cases, and you won't see the parallels immediately. The first is the trial of the police officer who was acquitted of the murder of Chris Cabba. And I would cautiously suggest to you this morning that's a fairly helpful illustration of why the CPS and or the police do not provide the public with a running commentary on complicated and potentially controversial cases, although I'm not sure controversy comes into it at all. The authorities do not provide running commentaries on these matters, ever. And the other case, perhaps less obviously, is Nicola Bulley, the woman who disappeared while walking her dog, and the vacuum that was created by the absence of information saw all manner of freaks and weirdos move into it, people right up to and including psychics. But I don't remember probably the first time I've seen social media at its worst in the context of a live investigation, although of course not, as things turned out, a criminal case. But this idea that because, and this is what we're going to be talking about today, why on earth do people want a running commentary when the wheels of justice move famously slow? And they have to, because if you make a mistake in the pursuit of a suspect or an alleged criminal, then that alleged criminal can end up walking free. That is why the wheels of justice must turn slowly. So the question of why people want a running commentary is probably the most interesting and safest question that we can ask today. I think it minimises any risk of contempt, but I must remind you not to comment on anything that could prejudice a jury. So imagine a juror listening to this programme, anything that could prejudice a juror. would be a potential contempt. I think that Honest Bob Jenrick is flirting with that principle by certainly seeming to suggest that the authorities may be lying to the public. But I suspect that Honest Bob Jenrick is having his last hurrah before the Conservative Party membership make their feelings clear on Saturday. He appears to have gone what is called in the trade full Farage with this attack upon institutions. Or Suella Braverman is a helpful precedent here as well. I don't know if you remember when Suella Braverman was attacking the police in the context of policing protests. And I think that was what actually finally prompted calls from Rishi Sunak for demands for her resignation. It was when she wrote an article actually attacking the police. So it's a very far-right trope to attack authority. It's an odd trait of authoritarianism that other authority is your enemy, the only authority you like. It's not a million miles away from what we've been discussing regarding Donald Trump in the last couple of days. They love authoritarianism when all authority rests with them. And Donald Trump talks about wanting generals like Adolf Hitler's because they didn't question anything that he told them to do. Other authority, for example, the rule of law, they can be persuaded to despise. And indeed the police. It's amazing how for a certain rather gristly section of our society, the support felt for police officers in the aftermath of that acquittal, and I made a decision slightly meaninglessly not to say the name of the police officer because I think he should have been afforded anonymity. I note that a lot of the support for the police that emerged in the aftermath of that very welcome acquittal has disappeared again, with claims that the police are somehow deliberately withholding information from the public or that there has been a cover-up. So let's reflect upon that for a moment. Yesterday, the CPS and the police released further information about the charges that the suspect accused of murdering 3 girls in Southport will face. They gave us more information. They released more information. What is your definition of a cover-up? Does your definition of a cover-up include the release of information, or does it include the retention of information? The reason why some people felt that more information should have been released at the time of the original alleged offence was because of the amount of lies that moved into the vacuum created. Up until the point that the police revealed that the suspect was a 17-year-old Welsh-born man, raised, we still believe, in a Christian family, the vacuum created on social media and nowhere else had become so rancid and so violent that not only was the entirely invented Islamic name of an alleged perpetrator halfway around the world before the truth had got its trousers on, but people were persuaded that the suspect was, variously, an recently arrived asylum seeker, someone that had come here via small boat, an irregular or illegal migrant, whatever word you prefer. The list of things that he was alleged to be, and remember, Nigel Farage said that he was taking his inspiration from the man currently on trial for sex trafficking in Romania, Andrew Tate. So all of these lies that moved into the space, none of them have been challenged by the events of the last 24 hours. All of the things that were claimed about the suspect are still untrue. He is not an asylum seeker. He is not recently arrived on a small boat that crossed the English Channel. He is not an illegal immigrant. He is not even an immigrant. He is a British-born teenager. So I don't understand what the running commentary is supposed to achieve. I certainly don't believe that possession of an American army document analysing a terror manual is proof of religious conversion or anything close to that. But again, the nature of an investigation is that when the CPS and the police are confident, they will release more information to the court. Via the public quite often. They've even answered the questions that Honest Bob Jenrick and to a much, much lesser extent Kemi Badenoch have been claiming need to be answered. Kemi Badenoch saying that Keir Starmer has serious questions to be asked of the police, the CPS and also of Keir Starmer, failing perhaps predictably to articulate what a single one of those questions might be. Because there are two ways of answering the question, has there been some sort of cover-up? The first is simply to say no, and the second is to say, isn't it a bit weird to claim that there's been a cover-up while we are in the process of releasing further information? And happily, both the CPS and the police have addressed these issues, although you won't see much of it on social media. Okay? The police said it is certainly not the case that they have been keeping things from the public. It would be highly unusual for them to release details of a live police investigation. We didn't find out, or you didn't find out, the full details of Chris Cabba's criminal past until the police officer accused of murdering him had been acquitted. I only found out 10 minutes before coming on air. There was a news blackout in place, and although it had no influence whatsoever on the officer's decision or the jury's verdict, it certainly felt germane to the story, didn't it? It certainly felt pertinent to the episode, and yet the decision is clearly taken that having information like that in the public domain is in danger of prejudicing a trial. So they always, quotes, keep information from us, end quotes, if they think it is likely to prejudice a prosecution or a trial. The CPS went further and reminded us that these things take time, in this case just 3 months, because it is a, quote, lengthy and complex investigation. And the closest I'm going to come to suggesting to you that it's not over yet is to insert the word yet into the sentence. It is also important to be clear that the Southport attacks are not, I'll insert the word currently, being treated as a terrorist incident. The possession of a document that could be useful in preparation of an act of terrorism is an entirely separate offence. They need to investigate. They need to collect evidence. They need to assemble a case. They need to, and this is crucial, and it's probably worth mentioning that the serial criminal Stephen Yaxley Tommy Robinson Lennon, he went to jail, not the most recent incarceration, or the one for fraud, or the one for immigration offences, but the one when he actually almost jeopardised the trial of people who were happily convicted of child abuse, of child sex grooming. That the idea that these people, and a lot of people sending me messages like this, are you going to apologise to those of us who spent the summer protesting because we knew he was, well, I can't read out the next bit because that would be contempt of court. You see, you've learnt nothing. The only people who've been sent to jail are people who attacked the police, incited violence against the police, or set fire to hotels, or incited other people to set fire to hotels. People have gone to jail because they pleaded guilty to the crimes they were accused of. And none of them were accused of freedom of speech. None of them were accused of hurty words or critical tweets. They were accused of very clear, very specific, very well-defined crimes, and they all pleaded guilty. If you don't plead guilty, the police and the CPS have a job to do. No matter what your local pub bore might believe about someone's guilt or otherwise, the court, the CPS and the police have to follow. And it would appear that Robert Jenrick was off sick from law school on the day that all this was explained. They have to follow incredibly stringent and strict guidelines. Almost everybody in public life knows this. Robert Jenrick knows this. Nigel Farage knows this. Kemi Badenoch knows this. All the newspaper columnists, all the newspaper editors, they all know this. But they either pretend or profess not to, because we're living in an era where, when a young mother disappears while out walking the dog, all manner of nonsense can spring up in its space, and people feel that they somehow deserve a running commentary. And that is, I think, the question that I want you to answer today. I wonder whether we've provided one answer for it already, but it's not enough to say social media has completely changed the way that some members of the public approach the criminal justice system. I think you could probably add that post-Brexit, the denigration of experts and authority contributes. I wouldn't want to necessarily speculate on where the kind of people who somehow think that all of the lies told about the Southport suspect in the immediate aftermath of the crime, all of them remain lies. But I've seen people on social media claiming yesterday that they've somehow been vindicated. It's quite extraordinary. All of the lies are still lies. Absolutely none of the misinformation has been refuted or undermined. But you've got these half-wits jumping up and down all over social media, up to and including Robert Jenrick, claiming that there's some sort of conspiracy going on, or claiming that there's some sort of problem here. And if you, like me, like to understand things, I think you start, particularly when you're still subject to contempt of court, I think you start with what's changed. Where has this appetite come from? Not only did I grow up in a country where the Conservative Party liked to cast itself as the party of law and order, but I also grew up in a country where we had, and I know I speak as a middle-class heterosexual white man, but we had respect for the rule of law, I think, and my personal characteristics probably influenced the fact that we also had respect for the police. There have been great miscarriages of justice, and there have been great journalists who have blown them open. There have been great politicians who have finally delivered the truth about events like Hillsborough to the public. But generally speaking, we respect the authorities, we respect the police, and we respect the rule of law. And we acknowledge that the wheels of justice turn slowly. So what has happened? Why do people want a running commentary when it is so obviously and demonstrably at odds with the interests of justice, the interests of the victims' families, and the interests of society? Where does this come from? This modern gnashing demand for a running commentary from authorities who have operated for decades in a provenly effective and successful way. If you don't understand, and I think you do, then just think about how much stuff the quotes authorities end quotes kept from the public about Chris Cabot until the verdict arrived. That is what they do. That's how they assemble a hopefully watertight case. So there is a question perhaps of whether or not social media has changed this game, whether or not it's naive of me to think that society can respect the slowness with which the wheels of justice turn, whether or not society can ignore the siren voices of the self-obsessed and the self-promoters claiming to know more than the authorities do, or claiming to be, quotes, just asking questions when they are knowingly and deliberately inciting the sort of violence that we saw this summer. I don't know. I don't know whether social media has created a space or a platform that changes the nature of the game, the historic game. And I don't know whether the people in what you might call legacy media who are going to let the tail wag their dog are going to wake up to the danger of what they're doing either. I certainly didn't expect to see a contender for the leadership of the Conservative Party sounding like one of the nuttiest conspiracy theorists on Twitter. But hey, I should have seen it coming after Suella Braverman attacked the police over cenotaph policing. But here we are. Why? Why do people want a running commentary? I honestly don't know. 0345 6060973. It might be that you can tell me why you think you should have a running commentary, even if, remember, it jeopardizes potential proceedings. Or you can tell me what you are observing in and of other people. Why do they want a running commentary when everybody in a position of expertise will tell you, and I mean everybody, will tell you that this is how the system works, and this is almost certainly how the system has to work. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 22 minutes after 10, and the question is framed in full cognizance of the laws of contempt. Why do people want a running commentary when it's so obviously injurious to the delivery of justice? It's 10:22.
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 10 is the time. And I mean, the more serious the story, the more reluctant I am sometimes to throw open the gates of Idiot's Corner. But I'll mention the handful of people referencing the ongoing case involving attacks at Manchester Airport involving police and members of the public, and some CCTV, of course, as that has been released. That fits entirely into what we've just been saying. That is a complicated case with moving parts involving also an independent police investigation and no early pleas of guilt. So all of this nonsense about two-tier justice completely ignores the fact that an early guilty plea versus the building of a complicated case does not speak to two tiers of justice. It speaks to two completely different exercises of justice. I think it might be worth listening to what Robert Jenrick had to say this morning, because I honestly never thought the day would dawn when a senior Conservative politician with ministerial experience began to sound like Billy Buncher-Numbers with a bulldog avatar on social media and a profound ignorance of the investigatory process, never mind, perhaps, contempt of court itself.
As the dad of 3 daughters, the Southport attack hit me personally. Of course, the legal process needs to be respected, but I'm seriously concerned that the facts may have been withheld from the public here. The government and authorities told us for months that they were not treating this as a terrorist incident. But today, the attacker has been charged with terrorist offences, and it has been revealed that he has been allegedly reading terrorist manuals. This atrocity was of immense public concern. The public had the right to know the truth right away. Any suggestion of a cover-up will permanently damage trust in whether we are being told the truth about crime in our country. So Keir Starmer must urgently explain to the country what he knew about the Southport attack and when he learnt it. Across the board, the hard reality of mass migration is being covered up. The public can see with their own eyes that they are being gaslit by the liberal elite.
Extraordinary. This suspect was born in Wales. Back to parents from somewhere else, but, you know, how many members of the Conservative Party cabinets that Robert Jenrick served in were we told to celebrate because they were born in this country to parents who came from somewhere else, up to and including his former boss in the Home Office, Suella Braverman. Absolutely extraordinary that he would go there. But this need, this thirst, this desire for a running commentary on the judicial process, on the investigation and the proceedings, I don't get it. And I'm hoping you do. 0345 6060973. Scott's in Cramlington. Scott, what's going on?
Hi James, you right?
I'm very good.
Good man. I think on this case, it was because it was so frightening. It's like little girls, do you know what I mean? And I remember I was away at the time. I was staying in Windsor, and I was sitting in the hotel room, and I turned the telly on and I see a nurse, and my kids are there with me, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I think you want to know who, you want to know why.
And they told us. They told us who quite quickly. They told us it's a 7. I mean, remember contempt of court laws, but there are lots of hideous crimes like this. I don't think maybe the murder of.
I don't think they are like lots of hideous.
No,
crimes
that's true.
Like this
no, you're quite right.
Like big. Honestly, and listen, I know that loads of people just want to go. See, look.
So why then?
Such of a group, or it was more like the threat to kids, man. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's a scary, horrible, terrifying.
So why does it then become? Why does it then become online, at least, a conversation about asylum seekers and a conversation about small boats? Because the impulse you describe is both normal and noble, you know, self-preservation, protection of your children, concern for your children. What were the people who were spreading the lies trying to achieve? What were they trying to make you frightened of?
I can't say what they were trying to achieve by lying, but if that is what they did,
well, we know that they did. They made it up, or they spread it without knowing it to be true.
Why did they do that? Is asking. I don't know. You know what I mean? I haven't got the answer to that question, but I think that it would have been helpful. That if people wanted to know, is it somebody with maybe a psychiatric issue?
Well, they can't do that in the first. They can't do that in the first instance. Listening to Jenrick there talking about the possibility of the suspect having read something, how hard would it be to actually prove that? Think of the effort you'd have to go to, the forensic analysis of a hard disk. There's a difference between having a PDF on your phone and being able to try to prove in court that you've actually read it.
Yeah, I get that.
So they're feeding what you're describing is.
Hang on a second, though. You remember back there was a lot of terrorist attacks on the continent. If maybe before 2020 there was the lorry incident and things like that, and they were almost instantaneously described as terrorist incidents.
Yes.
So I don't know if there's sometimes it's better for the security of the public, maybe, to tread carefully. I don't think you can deny the fact that there's a lot of angry people out there, and if somebody just all of a sudden goes, oh yeah, this is terror related, this is Muslim terror related, people are going to get angry quickly, and they got angry quickly anyway.
And yet, as it stands, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
It wasn't any of those things. And when it was demonstrated that it wasn't, there was no immigrant involved. The suspect is from a Christian family.
Not questioning that.
Then the riots still happen. So this is why I don't understand what a running commentary is supposed to achieve. You are never, Scott.
People want facts, James.
But you can't give facts if it's going to influence a court case. You are never going to try to set fire to a hotel full of asylum seekers in a million years.
Mate, I'm not being. I can't say how. Yeah, if this guy, and I haven't caught all.
No. Right? Stop there. Contempt of court. We can't speak specifically about any suspects. We can only, I mean, in the context of speculation, we can only talk about what we actually know.
From what I've heard, then,
go on.
It wouldn't be a million miles to it would be a pretty fair assumption to say that. I don't even know what I can say. Yeah, but from what's been said on the news, there was some Al Qaeda documents there.
Yes.
Yeah. That's not normal. Do you know what I mean? That's like that would be.
But again, we will find out in court what that was, and I can tell you already that it's not quite how it's been presented in some quarters. It's an American Army document that analyses a terror manual, and the ease with which one can find it is something else that will emerge in the coming days and the coming months, if not in court. So the running commentary that people want includes the information that was released yesterday. They couldn't release that any sooner until they were happy that the case they're trying to assemble in court would be served by the release of the information. So you describe a healthy impulse. You describe a parental reaction, I think, to the thing. But the hideousness of the crime, of course, is extraordinary, but it doesn't necessarily speak to public figures. Robert Jenrick talking about immigration today, people talking about asylum seekers. There's something else going on there. That's not the impulse that the people demanding a running commentary are seeking to feed. I think I know, but I want to hear some other answers first. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Space, isn't there, that it's quite hard to get into. I don't know whether Michael's right when he writes, you can't discuss anything with people who want to form a lynch mob. And yet I felt the last caller's description of an impulse was reasonable, noble even. If I have daughters, although I don't know that I'd open a comment upon new charges being brought against a suspect in a criminal case by referencing my own children. I don't think I would. Maybe, I don't know. We'll never find out because I'll never be running for leadership of the Conservative Party. But this space is really impenetrable. If you're in it, you are 100% certain that you're in the right. It is the furious certainty. But why you're 100% certain that you're in the right, why you want a running commentary, why you don't believe the authorities when they say everything we do in pursuit of the safest conviction possible. As with the Chris Cabba case, we want to get the safest conviction we can. Therefore, for example, the information about Chris Cabba's catalogue of criminal activity is not shared with the public or with the court. And you can't share it with the public without sharing it with the court. Because the judge and the jury, or the judge will very closely monitor the circumstances in which the jury arrives at a verdict. And so if I said to you, and they have done this is the bit I find baffling. The police and the CPS, the Chief Constable of Liverpool, put out a really, going about as far as I think you can reasonably go without compromising some of the great traditions of justice in this country, put out an explanation of what was going on. If you say, we're conducting our investigation with one priority, and that is the pursuit of a solid and safe conviction at the end of it. And then anybody who says, well, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? Do you see what I mean about furious certainty? I don't know what Jenrick would answer to that question. Why you can usually, when you're accusing or when you're examining a conspiracy theory, you can usually say, but cui bono? Who benefits from the conspiracy that you're describing? Who benefits from the claims that you're making? Who benefits from that? That the idea that you are conducting, the proof that a cover-up is being conducted is the release of information is absurd. And the claim that is happily at the moment confined to social media, but Generic might well be a canary down the coal mine on this one, the claim that none of the original misinformation about the Southport suspect being disproved or refuted, it is all still blatant lies, up to and including the idea that he'd recently arrived here on a small boat from France. How the hell does that possibly vindicate the people who spread the lies? Answer, furious certainty. But furious certainty about what? And this is where it gets pretty sticky, I think. So one of the, what would you call it? One of the silver linings, I don't know, of having quite a degree of prominence on social media and being a particular bête noire of the far right and the sort of racist rump of social media users. I get to see a little bit more of it than perhaps you do. And what has become clear over the last couple of years is the number of accounts that are absolutely dedicated to demonstrating some sort of ethnic proclivity for violence. So you find accounts that have got CCTV footage from something that was done in Rome 8 years ago, and it's proof that we are being overrun, and it's proof that we are under constant threat. There's so little evidence of it in daily life. There's so little evidence of it in the usual news cycle that these accounts have to essentially draw their footage and their claims from all over the world over a period as long as cameras have existed. And it's a sort of never-ending feed of racial prejudice, because you never see any white criminals on these accounts. You never see any white violence. You never see any stories about white murderers or white child abusers. It's always, always, always brown or black people. And I think just doodling around on social media, I think the people who buy into those kind of accounts are the people who are at the very forefront of the spreading of misinformation. So why do they want to run in commentary? Answer, because the suspect is black, and therefore they finally have a story in real time, in real life, that allows them to make hideous allegations and aspersions against all people of a certain ethnicity. And of course, you can't really deal with that as a prosecuting lawyer or as a police officer, because what you're dealing with is incoherent bigotry. But have a look. If you don't believe me, have a look at... So one of them... remember Chris? I had a personal experience of it the other day. So when Fraser was on the line talking to us about what had happened to the Chris Cabba case and revealing the full extent of Chris Cabba's criminal past. If you've been listening to the programme, you'd know I'd mentioned to you, I'd known about it before we came on air that morning, but we had to wait until after 11 o'clock before we could share it with you, because there were reporting restrictions. Chris Cabba's family wanted to keep the full extent of his hideous criminal past from the public. And sometimes, I despite my firewalls and best efforts to keep myself clean on social media, occasionally something sort of slips through. And I found a clip claiming, of my usually, miserable, grumpy old face, claiming that I was hearing it for the first time and couldn't disguise how unhappy I was to discover that Chris Cabba was a serial criminal. And you sort of, initial response to that is to giggle and think, good God, people have got far too much time on their hands. But then you look at where those kind of accounts sit on things like this case, where they sit on things like the spreading of misinformation, where they sit on things like the claim that ethnicity dictates a certain proclivity towards criminality or something like that. And you kind of realise it's probably not that funny after all. You can listen to a radio show and hear a presenter say, I knew about all this before you did, but here is Fraser Knight to fill you in on the details. And you can go viral claiming that this liberal presenter is somehow personally affronted or personally upset to discover what a wrong un Chris Cabba was. I mean, it's completely at odds with everything that we said on the programme, but in a moment of a clip, it works a treat. And those are the accounts that are dedicated to creating the idea that all immigrants are a threat, that all... And that's why they had to insist he was an immigrant. And it turns out that he isn't. But his parents were. So Robert Jenrick still goes there. Robert Jenrick still goes there. As a child of an immigrant, how on earth are you supposed to feel when a man who would be leader of the Conservative Party takes a hideous crime and uses it to malign you and your family? Are we supposed to be wary of Suella Braverman because her parents are immigrants too? So I think we know where some of this goes, but we don't know what to do about it. Harry's in Richmond. Harry, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I hope you're well.
Well, kind of.
Yeah, as well as can be. The question was quite almost rhetorical when you brought up the concept of self-preservation. My understanding of it, with no professionality in this area, is racism is a almost feature of self-preservation. It's a way for people who feel under threat because there are people who don't look like them coming into their space and threatening it because there's a way of life that they have that doesn't conform to the way of life of these other people, these non-white people. And that's the issue. It's this whole fact that people feel threatened by the mere existence of a person who doesn't look like them. It's simply they want this anarchy, they want this disorder as a way of being able to cope with this threat that's occurring in their daily life. When it's not, they just perceive it to be as such.
And they need to. I mean, this is the bit that possibly outsiders trying to understand it can never quite get inside. They really, really, really believe it. And they really, really need to believe it. So I don't think Robert Jenrick does. I think Robert Jenrick is trying to appeal to voters who are probably never going to vote for him because they'll always prefer Nigel Farage. But those people really need this, and they really do believe it, which is why these accounts on social media are so popular and so effective, because they constantly feed the narrative of, well, I suppose you'd have to call it a form of race science.
Well, it's anarchy. It's a way of creating that disorder because, I mean, for one, we're in a world where it's hard to keep a person's attention. Anarchy is almost a simple way of doing it because there's an area of disorder. Everyone always has their attention drawn by that. By doing what he's done, he's interfered with people's concepts of what's going on. He's created that interest first and foremost, and then he's pulling at people's heartstrings to make them feel like they're under threat, and that this is almost, for want of a better word, a bit of a saviour's complex coming in. There's a threat, I'm here, and I promise I can do something about this situation. That's what they all do, and I really despise politicians that fail to be unbiased in this concept. They use ethnicity because it's this whole saviour's mentality that they all think they can. Politicians can't save us from absolutely anything because that makes no sense. Our daily life is in our control. The future is in our control. The politicians who are democratically voted in by capitalism, realistically, they have this racist agenda because that's what promotes the anarchy that allows them to come into these positions where they get to reap rewards.
And it is as old as the hills, I suppose. But social media has changed the game somewhat, hasn't it? Social media. I mean, I'm never 100% sure about how much oxygen to give to some of the sort of outlets that we've just alluded to. But I'll read you here. So here's someone who it complains the complaints of the natives. He uses the word natives. So I don't know whether that would include you or me or Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch or Boris Johnson. I don't know who that would include. But these are the natives. The establishment, again, hard to define, refuses to listen to their concerns over foreigners flooding the country, which seems to me to be roughly 60% of all public discourse that I ever come across, but apparently you're not allowed to have that conversation. Lies and obfuscates over the crimes of the people brought in, which is demonstrably untrue and also an insane thing to do for any government. Attacks and undermines the nature of British identity, brackets, the suspect wasn't Welsh, close brackets. So we're back to then the question of who is British and who is not, and the answer would seem to be only natives can lay claim to that ethnicity. And then persecutes persecutes and censors those raising their voices, which is that wonderful conflation of people calling for violence against human beings, attacking police, or trying to set fire to hotels full of asylum seekers as somehow being simply the exercise of freedom of speech. So they're demonstrably nuts, these people, but they're absolutely certain that they're right, and on a mission of righteousness.
But they're not just right, they're malicious. They're using malice as a weapon in this context, because, I mean, the idea that somehow we're being persecuted. Now, I'm not going to have this whole, white guilt kind of trip on.
Sure,
but,
nor am I.
There are many people in non-UK countries that have to live with the fact that many British people went to that country. They were part of a British colony. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Suella Braverman, but it was the recall to the fact that India, prior to its separation from Pakistan, was colonized by Britain, and Britain to India has existed for centuries and so on. And the idea of a person not being British just because their ancestry is of Indian descent or Pakistani descent makes no sense to them, because to them, when Britain colonized the country, they became a part of a British empire, which therefore gave them some sense of British values. They come to this country just because they don't conform to the fact that they want to live in a red brick house or do whatever they want to eat, whatnot. Just because of that non-conformity.
And then, of course, the rhetorical cleverness kicks in when you describe a conversation like this one as treacherous or as somehow being anti-British, or whereas, in fact, it's just pro-decency. Ferret picks up the point. You know why some people want a running commentary on events like this, James. It's because they want proof of their prejudices. It happens with every horrific case we hear about until it's shown to be a white British person responsible, at which point all these questions stop. I think you'd struggle to argue with that. In fact, that racist little diatribe I read out a moment ago about natives kind of proves the point. If you care more about a crime when it's committed by someone who is that colour than you do when it's committed by someone who is that colour, what word would you use to describe that? Go on, riddle me this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:52. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know who Derek Bird was? Does that name mean anything to you? Derek Bird? I mean, I have to confess that I didn't immediately recognise the name. I had to jog my memory because a couple of people have brought it up in text, alongside mentions of Hungerford and Dunblane. Just examining that question of whether you respond to a crime committed by someone who's that colour differently from how you respond to a crime committed by someone who's that colour. And people do. People really do. Derek Bird killed 12 people, including his twin brother, in England in 2010. So just 14 years ago. The Hungerford massacre was in 1987 and the Dunblane school massacre was in 1996. My dad covered the first one, actually. I sort of remember it well. But I wonder whether that would, in a social media age, prompt demands that men who look like him should all be locked up, or men who look like him are all a threat to us, or men with a similar background to him, or the Dunblane killer, or what about the white supremacist terrorist who assassinated Joe Cox? So people who look like him, people with his background, people with Britain First on their biographies. Should we be deeply suspicious of them as well? So it's a horrible thing, this, to point out, and the people who are proof of what I'm describing hate it more than anybody does, but it's simply true. And what you have to understand, what's absolutely crucial, is they really, really believe it. So some of their leaders, some of the people who are saying, oh, please send me money for my legal fees, please do this, do that, here's my GoFundMe, please log on to my Substack or whatever it might be. I don't know whether they believe it or not. It might just be it's the only work they can get in fields that are adjacent to the field that I work in. I think some of them begin doing it for clicks and cash and end up believing it because human beings are a weird breed. But this only works because people honestly believe it. And that kind of prejudice is as old as the hills, you know? That kind of idea that all of this comes through a lens of colour and ethnicity. So it doesn't matter that every single claim made about the Southport suspect in the immediate aftermath of that attack was untrue. It didn't stop the riots, which of course many people refer to as the Farage riots. It didn't stop those. And now that more information has come out, it doesn't stem the claims of cover-up. How do you prove that you're not conducting a cover-up? Answer, you can't. And you certainly shouldn't try to prove it in order to assuage a baying mob, even if Robert Jenrick has put himself at the top of it, at the front of it. But if you're honest, then evidence that there isn't a cover-up going on would be the release of information. But if you are buying into that idea that that crime is worse than that crime, because although they are very similar and or identical, that one's worse because a black man did it, or that one's worse because a brown man did it. If that's what you're buying into, none of this touches the sides. None of this touches the sides. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, go to my latest tweet. It's not at the top of my feed because I've tweeted some other helpful and fascinating stuff as well. But go to my tweet that begins, "So the release of information is." I'll retweet it now so that it does actually go to the top of my feed. And have a look at some of the replies, or some of them are already in contempt of court. Join me in glossing over or giggling at some of the uglier personal attacks. But have a look at some of the quote tweets. Click on view post engagements. Can you do that on someone else's account? Or just and you'll see what I mean. And then go and look a little further at some of the accounts that are there. And the kind of people that they admire and the kind of people that they think are on their side. Because I don't think people know what I know about this kind of stuff because they don't have their head so far over the parapet on a daily basis. Extraordinary. And when the lies are about you, it changes the way you look at it. So that Chris Cabba thing did click with me a little bit. I saw another one claiming that I'd gone on my own wife's hen night the other day, which you just sort of sit here going, well, where does this come from? Just extraordinary. I turned up on my own wife's hen night. But so when they lie about you, the only benefit of that, it gives you a really helpful insight into the lies they tell about anything, up to and including the most heinous of crimes. If they can lie about that, they can lie about anything. And why are they lying about it? Because the single most important thing in their life is their racism. And that, I'm afraid, does apply to some people in the public space. Eugene is in Northallerton. Eugene, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm like you. For me, it's about racism. It's just that simple because there's, like you pointed out, Dunblane, Jamie Bolt. There's so many cases that happened, and no one was starting riots, no one was marching, no one was doing anything.
No one was claiming a cover-up. No one was claiming
exactly. And it's James. Look, I was born in this country. I'm a black person. I'm 56 years old. And I've had this all my life. And over time, I thought during the 2000s we were slowly getting there, and things were getting better. But it just comes down simply to racism. Because, I'm... As a
because
black
just to be clear, for someone who's just tuning in, the racism that we are describing is an individual sitting there contemplating two comparable crimes and deciding that one is worse than the other, or caring more about one than the other because of the colour of the culprit or the accused.
Exactly. Because, like I said, James, as a black person, do you think, I'll just say this question to all people. As black, Asian, Muslim, doesn't matter what domination, does anyone sit there seriously think we were sitting there going, oh, I'm glad that them poor girls got killed? Everyone was devastated. It was a terrible event. And the person rightly has been prosecuted. But again... Don't go any
further. You're giving me the heebie-jeebies. You've been fine so far, but don't go into any further detail on the specifics of that case. But the idea that the media... Here's another quote tweet on my own feed. The media is still lying to you. So what would the lie be today, do we think?
Exactly. But like you just said, James, the point is this. Crime, it doesn't matter what the colour... The person's, it's wrong, it's wrong. But as we said, it shouldn't be like, just because this person's this colour, that crime is worse than someone. It's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. And
except it's not, is it? If you're in the category that we described, and they can't get out of that category. It's the same with the wheels of justice move slowly. The case is complicated. The CCTV footage that's been released makes it even more complicated. The investigation into the actions of a police officer makes it even more complicated. It goes up, and because It involves people who appear to be Muslim or people who are Muslim. The Manchester airport case is also proof of some terrible conspiracy or some terrible...
Exactly.
It's bizarre that white people have been sent to jail for attacking the police, and they are heroes, and brown people who are being investigated for attacks upon the police are somehow proof of a two-tier system. It's quite bizarre, isn't it? I wonder if we could ever create a kind of alternative universe in which you didn't know the colour of a criminal, and then just see how many of these self-appointed heroes and, quotes, natives, end quotes, how many of their little brains would actually explode. Take care, Eugene. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why do you do it, James? Well, there are two reasons why I do it. One is obvious. There is truth and there is untruth, if you can hold on to the truth. Even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. But oddly enough, it helps people. Talking about this stuff, explaining it, specifically addressing the kind of accounts that people can fall for. I often hear from partners, usually, not parents or children, oddly, but partners of people who've fallen down these rabbit holes. The crossovers are extraordinary. Why would believing nonsense about vaccines make you more likely to hate foreigners? But it does. I guess it's all about pursuing attention and pursuing clicks. But, those of us who are lucky enough to have a platform with some reach have, I think, I know it sounds a bit pompous, but a responsibility to try to help people who are being manipulated and lied to, and quite often, of course, robbed blind by people feeding them an unleavened diet of hatred and lies. It is 4 minutes after 11. How do we do this one then? There's a really strange little juxtaposition of stories here, isn't there, as we prepare for the budget, and Aggie is outside Downing Street, is she? Yeah, of course she is. That's where Rachel Reeves lives. And with the microphone doing that thing, which I've never said this on the radio before. We could fake it quite easily. So, now we've got cameras there. We can't fake it. But Keith could just make some noises. Eleanor could pretend to be Rachel Reeves. So Aggie's there desperately hoping and waiting for people important to appear. And as soon as they do, we will cross live to her. And then Rachel Reeves makes her way slowly to the House of Commons and delivers her budget. But the way that the stories have collated, if you like, coalesced is a better word, isn't it extraordinary? So I see two stories in relief to each other. You know that the private education story and the landlord story is the same story. It is, won't somebody please think of the lucky ones, those of us who are lucky enough to be able to send our children to private school, or those of us who are or have been lucky enough to make the easiest money ever by simply being already wealthy enough to own a home that you don't live in, but other people will pay to do so. That's 4% and 7% of the population, respectively. So that would be on one side of the media coverage of the budget, the idea that, oh God, it's terrible. They're going to come after the most privileged. They're going to come over after the luckiest members of society, and then I get a million messages saying, I'm not lucky, or I work bloody hard for my money. And that's relevant to the people on the other side of the juxtaposition that I'm about to describe, because there are people on minimum wage. What do you think it is? I know it's a terrible thing to say, but during the conversation we had about tax the other day, it became crystal clear to me that people don't know anything. Whether it's a deliberate kind of denuding of the population, or whether there's just so much more to distract ourselves with these days, but people just don't know anything about anything. I had a woman ring in the other day who thought 40% of the population was privately educated, or 40% of parents were sending their children to private schools. But people ringing in and say, well, I'd pay more tax if I knew where it went. And I turn into the "What have the Romans ever done for us" sketch from Monty Python, from Life of Brian. It is actually incredible, the effort that is put into persuading people who need public services that they don't, and that they shouldn't be paying taxes in order to provide public services. It's still a conversation that we haven't got to the heart of. We haven't got to the heart of the question of why everyone can simultaneously recognise that the country is in dire straits and reject furiously the idea that they should pay a little bit more tax. You wait to see what the Daily Mail does tomorrow. The Daily Mail is going to have an aneurysm on its front page tomorrow, whatever happens. They're already talking about the greatest heist in history, or something like that. Who's going to pay for the army? Who's going to pay for the NHS? Who's going to pay for our roads? Who's going to pay for pretty much everything of which we are free to avail ourselves as members of this society. The biggest heist in political history. As Chancellor pledges to invest, Tories hit out at Labour's record £35 billion tax bomb. The same newspaper, of course, that greeted Liz Truss's fiscal catastrophe with the front page headline, "Finally, a true Tory budget." Same front page, of course, that described Theresa May as the steel of the new Iron Lady. But unfortunately, in newspaper journalism, there are no refunds available, and indeed no repercussions for people who turn out to be catastrophically and horrifically wrong about everything. Minimum wage, what do you think it is? See, if you live on it or even close to it, I think you're probably going to know the numbers inside out. I could be wrong about that, because you could be like me, and whether I'm earning a lot or a little, I don't pay anything like enough attention to my own economic situation, something about which my late father used to despair. But what do you think it is? What do you think the minimum wage is? And how can it possibly be controversial to raise it? Answer: bosses will complain. More, I think, in the case of the hospitality industry, over the lifting of a COVID-era relief on business rates. So for how long should a government be keeping COVID-era dispensations in place? For example, the £2 cap on bus fares, which Labour inherited from the Tories and which was due to end at the end of this year, and will. The cap will instead go up to £3. But you could, if you were dishonest, portray that as a negative, or as a deliberate attack upon bus travellers. The same, I think, with COVID-era tax relief on business. I'm not getting any COVID-era tax relief. So why would businesses? Answer: because people were less likely to use them. That's also what the bus cap was designed to do. The bus cap was designed to tempt people back onto public transport when they had previously been tempted off it, or ordered off it, or reluctant to use it. So by saying, look, it'll cost you a pittance to bomb around town by bus, the idea was more people would get on it. And the business rates relief for hospitality companies is to help them stay open as the flow of custom returns. But it can't be permanent, can it? It can't be permanent, because the system is built upon a presumption of income. And you have extraordinary circumstances during which you reduce that income. You can't sustain it forever. But and there's your headline: budget rises and workers' rights add up to perfect storm for business. That's on the Times today. Business leaders warned they face a perfect storm in the budget as they are hit by more taxes, higher wage bills, and the cost of implementing Labour's overhaul of workers' rights. How many people feel a hardening of their resolve, a sort of crystallisation of rejection and anger when they see the words workers' rights? Now, I'm not subscribing to the idea that the pendulum swings 100% in the opposite direction. There needs to be a balance between employer and employee. But how have we ended up, maybe we always have actually, living in a country where the words workers' rights are printed on a front page of a national newspaper read almost exclusively by workers, but workers' rights are portrayed to us as a negative? How can workers be against workers' rights? Is that a phone-in? Is that a question worth asking? How can workers be against workers' rights? 034560, let's see. I think that might work. It's not what I was planning on going in on, but I can't find my article about the minimum wage. How can workers be persuaded that workers' rights are a bad thing? 034560600973. And when it comes to minimum wage, I don't want to sound completely detached from reality or completely out of touch, but how many people actually know what it is? And how many people can provide us with a helpful insight into A, what it's like to live on it, and B, what the increase in minimum wage is going to be? And we'll get stuck into that after Aggie Schomburg joins us live from Downing Street. Aggie, what is going on? What have you been hearing from Cabinet Ministers?
James, right now, as I speak to you in Downing Street, Rachel Reeves has just left number 11. She is standing outside number 11, flanked by her Treasury ministers. She's got Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, right next to her, James Murray and Tulip Sadiq on the other side too. She is standing outside this big red box moment before she delivers her budget in the Houses of Commons. She has just completed the Cabinet, where she has unveiled what the budget's going to look like for every different minister. And we had various different Cabinet ministers coming out before her and her Treasury ministers. So she's standing there still sort of looking around, smiling as she holds up her red box. Now, this has been a tradition that Chancellors will hold up this red box since actually the 1860s, when William Gladstone was the first Chancellor who had a red box. That red box was actually used by George Osborne in 2010. Rachel Reeves now just standing outside number 11, still holding her red box. That looks like a new one, not the one used by William Gladstone. But as I say, there's been a Cabinet meeting this morning. Cabinet ministers have come out, all looking pretty smiley, I would say, despite the fact that they do know this is going to be a pretty difficult budget for them. It sounds like £40 billion of black hole is going to be filled with about £35 billion worth of tax rises. So suggestions this will be one of the biggest tax raising budgets that has ever happened. And Rachel Reeves very much not playing down the significance of it over the weekend. She referred to this as one of the greatest economic moments of her party's history, comparing it to 1945 with Clement Attlee, 1964 with Harold Wilson, and 1997 with Tony Blair. So as I say, she's still standing outside number 11, holding up that red box. She's now by herself. Treasury ministers have gone. After this, she will walk over to number 10, just outside number 10 Downing Street. She will get in the car and she will head over to Downing Street, where she will deliver the first ever budget by a Labour Chancellor, by a female Chancellor, I should say, and the first Labour budget in 14 and a half years. So she is just walking now over to her car, and I can just get a shout to her. Rachel Reeves, are we going to see huge tax rises today? No answer. She's just getting into the car and she will drive off to the Houses of Parliament.
Didn't give her much chance to answer, Aggie, to be fair, you know. You sound...
I could have asked her slightly earlier, that's fair.
It's wonderful to hear such levels of excitement in reporting a budget, and I think, I mention that because I share your excitement. It does feel different from the previous 14 years, given that this is likely to be different, as it were.
Indeed it is. It is going to be different, partly because of those huge tax rises. I have to say, partly different because, as well, we know a lot of what is going to be in it, which is quite strange in itself. They've leaked out a huge amount ahead of time. They've also put a lot of it in press releases. Indeed, Rachel Reeves last Thursday actually announced that she's going to tweak her fiscal rules, something the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, was absolutely furious about. Indeed, there was an urgent question on that yesterday in the House of Commons. But I mean, it's interesting. I've been speaking to Labour MPs, as you'd expect, in the last few days about how they're feeling, and there's quite a lot of trepidation among Labour MPs. They are concerned about the level of tax rises. They are concerned how it's going to go down in their constituencies, but I think there's a level of excitement among Labour MPs this morning as well, just bumping into some in the Houses of Commons, just saying, you know, this is the first Labour budget in 14 years. This is really exciting, and I wonder whether how long that excitement will carry, whether it might unravel, because you know as well as I do, James, these budgets can unravel in the details in the coming days, so that could happen, but as I say, a lot of excitement, but some trepidation, some scepticism, some nervousness among Labour MPs too.
George Osborne, who was hijacked by a Cornish pasty, I think, and so that's what you mean when you refer to the detail. Also, it's going to be the biggest test yet of whether or not the public is capable of looking through the coverage of the almost exclusively right-wing media, because you could write their front pages now before you've even... In fact, you don't need to. They've already done things like the greatest heist in history. But when people... I don't know how people can judge what impact budgets are ever going to have upon them in the first moment of reaction. So you'll be looking at things like an increase in minimum wage. That immediately translates into easily comprehensible financial improvement to the circumstances of many people. Just remind us, Aggie, what happens now. She's in the car, she's gone to Westminster, she goes and sits next to Keir Starmer for the duration of what, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, will be Rishi Sunak's final excursion as leader of the Conservative Party. And then as PMQs concludes, Rachel Reeves gets to her feet and makes history as the first female Chancellor, not just the first female Labour Chancellor, but the first female Chancellor in the history of our Parliament.
Indeed, that's right. So she's just in the car now. She will go to Prime Minister's questions. I don't think Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister's actually left yet for Prime Minister's questions. He will do Prime Minister's questions with her sitting next to him, and she will then present her first ever budget, first ever female Chancellor's budget as well. And Rishi Sunak will respond. And yes, you're right. Rishi Sunak, this will be his final ever Prime Minister's questions. It'll be interesting to see how he ends it. We've had various different endings from leaders, haven't we? Boris Johnson saying "Hasta la vista,
a song,
baby,"
perhaps?
and
Maybe
Tony
a song
Blair
from
saying,
Rishi Sunak. And I said, thanks for the memories. Send in the clowns. Send in the clowns. There you go. That's our text vote. What song should Rishi Sunak conclude his final PMQs with? Send it through to 84850. And is that tradition for the leader of the opposition to respond to the budget statement, to the budget, as opposed to the shadow chancellor?
Yes, indeed. So Rishi Sunak will respond, and we actually know he's already pre-briefed some of what he's going to say in response. Which, to be fair to him, I mean, they've pre-briefed a lot of what's going to be in the budget, so I suppose he can pre-brief what he's going to respond to it. But going to say that it's a betrayal, going to talk a lot about the trust issue. And I think we can expect them to talk a lot about whether or not there's broken manifesto promises on national insurance, specifically, and what is a working person, talking perhaps about the bus cap going from £2 to £3. So things like that I think they will try and cling on to in the aftermath of the budget. But James, you mentioned there the 2012 pasty with George Osborne, when a lot of that unravelled afterwards and they had to U-turn on the pasty tax. I do think that is quite a lot of the reason why they have pre-briefed so much of it, because as someone who used to work for Liz Truss said to me, the problems with budgets is they are often decided in dark rooms with civil servants and Treasury officials and the Chancellor, and they don't see the light of day until they're announced in the budget, like with the pasty tax. I remember George Osborne saying afterwards he just didn't consider that it would affect pasties because it was about hot food that would eventually cool down, and afterwards he had to U-turn on it. And I think part of the reason they have just said so much of what they're going to do is so they can sort of pitch roll ahead of time so they don't have a moment like that. But having said that, I was speaking to a Labour official last night who said to me, Rachel Reeves' great political hero is Gordon Brown, and he was the master of budget theatre, the master of the rabbit. So they said, I don't know, there could be some surprises today.
Oh, you preempted my final question. Could there be a rabbit emerging from a hat at any point? Given, no, it's wonderful when that happens, because people can hear less of me, which I think everybody welcomes. Aggie, thank you. We'll catch up with you again, if not on this programme, then certainly on Sheila's programme later today, because LBC will be broadcasting the budget in full. And then Sheila will be taking up the analysis of it shortly afterwards, 20 minutes after 11. Has anyone actually had a go at that? I was half joking. Katie says Singing in the Rain. Darren, come on, Money by Pink Floyd is a bit obvious. Fade Away by Oasis. We've got an early leader, Neil in Skipton. If Rishi Sunak were to end his final PMQs with a song, I can't believe that this has happened. If he were to end his final PMQs with a song, what song should it be? You can text that to 84850. And in a minute, we must have a phone in about the minimum wage. So if you've got something you want to say about the minimum wage, even though I haven't really asked the question yet, then ring 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
This is happening a lot at the moment. And I presume there's nothing that we can do about it. I know this is live on LBC, but this is really just a private conversation with Keith. There's nothing we can do about it, is there? Because some of these questions that I ask, the answers are so hilarious. The fact that my inbox turns into a ticker tape and I can't really keep track of it at all. I mean, literally, the minute I try and read one out, it gets overtaken by 10 more. But there's nothing we can do about that. Can we pause it? Can you pause it, Keith? Top right? That says analytics. I don't want to press that. Anything could happen. Whatever I said, I didn't mean it. Stupid Mistake by Gareth Gates, Leaving on a Jet Plane. Isn't there Shut Up Your Face by Joe Dolce, Harder Than You Think by Public Enemy, I Want You Back by the Backstreet Boys. The rest of the Shadow Cabinet could join in and harmonise. I mean, it would be nice. Although, as Emma points out, he could just turn his back on everybody and whistle blithely as he walks off into oblivion, as David Cameron kind of did. Right. I don't know how to conduct conversations about minimum wage, right? Because I'm a bit of a lefty, as you may have established over the years, and I am a passionate believer that our system for a long time has skewed too much in favour of wealth and employers as opposed to poverty, if you like, and employees, but not to the point where not to the point of communism, or even in the context of commerce, socialism. I recognise that there is a point at which a business will close. My dad was essentially the industrial correspondent for the Daily Telegraph in the Midlands. He was the Midlands correspondent, but there was so much industry in the Midlands that a huge amount of the work that he did in the 1980s would have been industrial. He was covering the car industry in Birmingham, note to younger viewers, there used to be one, and he was covering the mining industry across the whole of the United Kingdom. Note to younger viewers, I shouldn't say viewers, it's listeners, but the figure of speech is viewers. There used to be one. So Dad described the decline and eventual almost disappearance of the once mighty motor trade in this country. I know we still make cars, of course, but it's Japanese companies now, and the idea of big British manufacturers in the motor trade. Dad described the decline of that, described the disappearance of that. And the same with coal mining, which is a slightly different story. But it means that I'm not stupid. I'm not going to sort of mount a political platform that claims you give everything you can to the workers and somehow the incentive for an employer to carry on would stay there. But I also find that messages like this do resonate a bit with me. So James, I appreciate that you can't critique other LBC presenters, but I heard a guest on another programme from the hospitality sector complaining about the coming rise in minimum wage. He seemed to complain that in addition to the minimum wage, he was also now required to give them their tips and service charges via the new scheme. He genuinely seemed to believe that he should be able to pay them less than the minimum wage with tips topping up their rate of pay to reach minimum wage. I don't pay service charges and leave tips for that to be deducted from the minimum wage to bolster the owner's profits. I do so because hospitality workers deserve a bit extra, a bit more than the minimum wage. And that's why I do it, says Claire. And I kind of agree. Well, I do completely agree. But how do we together today strike a balance between ideal and real? So, of course, the minimum wage should not be £50 an hour. Right? Everybody knows that. Neither should it be £5 an hour. Not everybody knows that. There are plenty of employers and right-wingers who think that £5 an hour is more than enough for the workforce, even though their own children are probably in it. But we've spent a lot of time examining how you persuade people to vote and act against their own and their family's interests. Hashtag Brexit. We won't do that again today. How do you strike a balance between those two things? I genuinely don't know. How could I, as a layman, know whether or not an employer is making a valid point when they tell me that they can't afford an increase in minimum wage, or whether or not they're just being greedy? How do you know? 0345 60973. I remember them all queuing up to tell me that they'd be bust by Christmas when it was first introduced, but spoiler alert, they're all still here. And I know what it is, because Eleanor brought me the notes during the little crossover live to Aggie Chambray there. It will rise in April. Over 21s will receive £12.21 an hour. Do you do that thing that you did as a kid? Do you still do the sum? You read what the hourly rate is, you times it by 8 and then times it by 5 to see what the weekly wage would be. And I took my first job in River Island. I can't remember what the actual rate was, but the first thing you do is times it by 8 and then times it by 5 to see what you'd actually be taking home at the end of the week. And then I guess you then times it by 52 if you're salaried and you get paid holidays to work out what the annual income would be. So £12.21 an hour. 18 to 20-year-olds and apprentices will see their minimum hourly pay increase as well. So for the over 21s, it's going up from £11.44 to £12.21. It won't kick in until April of 2025, so everyone's got loads of time to get ready for it. It means that for someone working full-time, and it's a 37.5-hour week now as opposed to 40, that will see their income rise from 22,368 to 23,873. So it's a rise of around 1,500 quid a year, which I am not qualified to describe as a significant amount because I don't know. I presume it is. In percentage terms, it looks like it, but I don't know. I haven't known for years what it would be like to survive on minimum wage. I haven't known since the years after I was a student when I was working in retail. And I was on commission, so that was more than what would have been minimum wage if minimum wage had existed. And then for 18 to 20-year-olds, what looks like an even more significant rise from £8.60 an hour. So you can do that one, I think, in your head, can't you? You can do the calculation there. So £8.60 an hour times 8 and then times 5. Work out what it is a year. Times 52. 14,762 will be the new amount because that's going up to £7.55. This is the largest hike in the minimum wage for under 21s in history. And it's a move towards a single rate for all adults. So you will no longer get paid less for the same amount of work because you're under 21. And although I want you to tell me how best to analyse this story, how you can tell how much is too much, how much credibility, how much time we should give to the employers who, and it is one of the easiest jobs in the world in the context of putting together a radio programme. Can you find me an employer to complain about the minimum wage? Can I ever? So, I mean, here's 1,000, pick one. Can you find me a worker to tell me what it's like to survive on the minimum wage? It's less likely to be popping up in producers' contacts books. But there needs to be a balance struck. But let me put my political idealism out there for you. And let me say, this is absolutely bloody brilliant. It just is. And who can possibly object to the idea that the lowest paid people in the country are going to get more money? This is a phone-in question, by the way. It's not rhetorical. I want you to object and tell me why you object. But at first glance, when's the last time a government announced something that made you reach for the champagne corks on behalf of somebody else? I've spent 14 years listening to budgets that will make me wealthier, that will reduce my tax burden, that will help me out financially. Apart from the what was it, the PR45 or something like that. I must pay more. That was bad. But then Liz Truss promised she was going to reverse it and make me IR45. And then, of course, she didn't hang around for long enough to do so. But the idea that I am uplifted and impressed by a government announcing pay rises for the people who need them most. 0345 6060 973. What's not to like? Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I worked in retail for 25 years. Have been. This is from Richard. It's hard work. You're telling me it is. Is there any job? Well, actually there is. But so many jobs depend upon camaraderie, don't they? The difficulty or the speed with which the clock ticks has so much to do with how much banter and pleasure and time you spend with your colleagues. Speaking of which, I just described the tax schedule as PR45. Keith corrected me very kindly in my ear and told me it was IR45, and 207 of you have been in touch to tell us both that it's actually IR35. So third time lucky on that, and Keith was technically, I suppose, a little closer. But Richard tells us he's never understood the difference between a poor wage and a poorer wage. Retailers will say, oh, it's unaffordable. They always do. But experiences say that big losses and bad decisions are made by those on much, much higher wages. Surely they are the ones who should be scrutinised. So how does it go? How does it work? How do you know when too much is too much? Because to my naive, idealistic undergraduate eyes, and I was working in retail when I was an undergraduate, this is wonderful. Significant, measurable pay rises for the lowest paid people in the country. How could anybody possibly object to that? 03456060973. Alison's in Bury St Edmunds, lovely part of the world. Alison, what would you like to say?
Oh, lovely to talk to you again, James. As a small business owner,
how tall are you? I
agree. Very small.
Okay.
Under 5 staff members. It's a small vegan cafe in Bury. I think we've spoken before quite a while ago about vegan stuff.
Yes.
I agree wholeheartedly with minimum wage. I've always thought the gap between the youngsters and those over 21 was probably a little bit too big. That being said, like if we take last year's minimum wage, it cost me £100 a month straight off. My rent went up £100 a month, so I was £200 down. I had to increase my prices, which is fine. because I'm still under that VAT threshold.
But if your rent's going up, then you mean in the shop?
Yes.
Yes, but then the
shop.
people you're paying the minimum wage to, their rent would have gone up in the last, especially since Liz Truss was Prime Minister as well, wouldn't it? And therefore their wages need to go up as well, by your own logic.
Yeah, definitely. But I think what needs to happen is, I think they look at it a different, in a different way. They need to look at it in a different way, because no company would put there, because it was almost £1 per hour last year for those over 21. So no company in their right mind would put £1 on their staff's wages without doing a cost-benefit analysis for their company. So, but we didn't get that choice. It was just, this is the minimum wage, do it, which is fine. So
it's a timely reminder that Jeremy Hunt increased minimum wage for that age group. And oddly enough, it wasn't described as the greatest heist in history if I remember correctly, by the right-wing media in quite the same way that this one will be.
No, exactly. And I think that is part
How
of the
can you
problem.
be did I hear you correctly? You're under the VAT threshold, but you employ 5 people.
Well, me and 3 part member staff.
Okay.
So I don't have any full-time member staff.
Okay.
I do a lot of it on my own.
Of course.
We are a cafe. We've got a little shop attached.
Lovely.
And we do quite well overall. But I'm up against it anyway because we're vegan. So it's not just a usual cafe. So we're kind of up against it on the 2 fronts. But what I think, and this is just my opinion, they should do it against your turnover. So, say, for example, your turnover is between, 85,000 and 150. You should be given a choice. I'm not saying you can put the wages up. They should say, okay, so next year you have to put your wages up from £11.50 to £12. And then if your turnover is greater...
Yeah. But then that won't work, will it? Unless I've misunderstood you, because I'm going to go and work for the cafe over the road, who've got a higher turnover than you, and therefore can pay me a higher wage.
Oh, I have very low staff, and there's no cafe across the road.
but I'm speaking metaphorically. You can't make these for a nation. You can't say you don't have to pay your staff more because you're not earning as much as other companies are. I mean, that's why you need a national minimum wage, to prevent less scrupulous employers than you having a sort of Dutch auction and competing on who can get away with paying the least. Exactly.
And there are employers out there who don't do holiday pay, they don't do sick pay, and that beggars belief. I mean,
Alison, have you got a violin there?
No.
God, that's a shame. Just a tiny one would do. I don't get holiday pay or sick pay, and it's an absolute travesty.
Oh, okay.
Don't you think that's a disgrace? Absolutely disgraceful. I'm breaking records left, right, and centre, and I don't get holiday pay or sick pay.
Yeah, but are you classed as self-employed?
No.
Oh, you should do then.
I know. It's outrageous. This is the kind. No, it's not. It's a little bit complicated. But
no, I know. I'm pulling your leg.
I'm pulling your leg as well, because I'm paid very handsomely, and of course one of the downsides of that is I don't get sick pay or holiday pay, but that I can live with it. How do I know how much is too much? So when they announce later today that the minimum wage is going up for your older employees to £12.21 an hour, there will be howls of disapproval from employers.
Yeah, but we've got 6 months, so...
Yes, exactly.
It's not like...
But we can't say they're all swinging the lead, can we? So some of them will have...
No, some will be, obviously, and some... Because it'll be... I won't... A little bit of a personal thing. Yeah. I don't take too much out of the business because I want the business to survive. So I do a couple of little part-time jobs elsewhere.
Oh, crikey!
That's just how I. So I am an employer and an employee. So I see it from both sides.
Yes.
So it's just how it is. If I relied on a whole wage from here, then I'd probably close. But I don't. But I think that's the problem.
Right, you sound lovely, and you obviously care for your staff, and your staff reward you with loyalty, and you all get on very well, and they're more friends than colleagues, or certainly more friends than employees, and there would be a point at which your business became unsustainable, and as you say, you've got until April 2025 to work it out, so that point is unlikely to be a rise of... What's 1221 minus 1144? It's just shy of 80p, isn't it? Just shy of 80p an hour. So that is what, £4, about £7.40 a day, give or take. £7.40 a day. You can't afford to pay your staff £7.40 a day more. suppose it depends how many staff you've got. Then if the boot was on the other foot, you'd say to the employer, have you thought of cancelling your Netflix subscription or eating fewer avocados? Or, in the same way that Norman Tebbit told unemployed people they should get on their bike, you say, well, you need to be a better boss. You can't afford to pay this minimum wage, then you're obviously not very good at what you do. And you need to pull your socks up and sort yourself out. But that rhetoric never goes up the chain of employment. It only ever comes down. Penny is in Knutsford, another lovely part of the world. Penny, what would you like to say?
Hi there. So
Hello,
I own a small retail business. We sell ladies' clothing. We employ 28 people.
Do you have a lot of footballers' wives coming in?
We do, but we're very
I
kind
thought
of
you might.
high street prices.
Oh,
So
lovely. I know Knutsford. I used to know Knutsford quite well. I haven't known Knutsford for 30 years, but I used to knock around there quite a bit, would you believe? There was a lovely restaurant called What's Cooking.
Oh, nice.
But you
I
don't
don't think it's
remember.
there anymore,
You're too young, aren't
unfortunately.
you? It's goes straight over your head. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. Carry on.
So we employ 28 people. When we started in 2016, we paid £1 above the minimum wage. We pay all our employees the same, whether they're 16 or 60.
Why do you do that?
I think,
Why do you do that? Just out of interest, because you don't have to.
because I feel like they're doing the same job.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem fair to me that,
Good for you.
there's a difference.
Yes.
So we do try and be quite progressive. But since the start of COVID, the minimum wage has actually increased by 39%, and I'm not including where it's going to go in 6 months' time.
No.
So a 39% increase in salaries is absolutely huge for a small business. So I think when we talk about employers, we do need to think about every employer and, how difficult it is. We've got so many empty retail properties. We've got empty high streets across the country, and
That's
it's because
true.
a lot of it doesn't make sense in this particular part of business anymore. When you add it up or together, a butcher, how many pieces of meat would you need to sell to pay your rents and your rates and your salaries? And as those salaries move up, and it's not creeping, it's a rush.
That's a big rise. I mean,
It is.
as a non-employer, I think I probably have the benefit of a little bit more idealism than you can allow yourself. Nobody on a full-time income should be compelled also to claim universal credit, should they? We could agree on that, but it doesn't change the fact that if you were to pay them enough that they didn't have to claim universal credit, then your business might not survive.
I'm there with you. I think the problem is how much other outgoings have gone up. So people aren't feeling the benefit of the increase in the minimum wage because of especially rents, how much they've moved up.
Yeah. Well, they're feeling the
my-
benefit in the sense that it might all be going on rent, but they wouldn't be paying their rent if
Exactly.
they didn't get the increase in minimum wage.
Exactly. So if the government could control the increase in rents,
That's
then
interesting.
perhaps we could do something further down the line and not have to increase the minimum wage quite so much.
How hard is this going to hit you, Penny?
I think we will survive it because we charge low prices to make sure that we can we've got that constant footfall, so I can creep them up slowly. But there is only so much that I can move them up.
Yes.
So we will survive it, but we're at that kind of end of the market where it's talking about surviving rather than increasing and growing. So I've got 5 shops, and as I said, I employ 28 people. If we got a little bit more support, if things were a little bit easier for us, I could be growing my business. I could be opening in a load more towns, and I
Creating
could be
more
providing
work,
more jobs.
but on
Exactly.
lower pay. I mean, it's this is where
Not necessarily lower pay, but just not if we don't continue to increase it at the same rate. I don't think people need to be paid less, but I think there's other things that we can do to make sure
like what?
that businesses can survive.
Like what? I don't want this to be a gotcha. You might not have anything at your fingertips. It's not a Brexit phone-in. I don't expect you to provide actual substantive answers to a question that I've asked you. But like what? What would most obviously really help you build and grow?
I think it is that thing about controlling people's outgoings, so stopping people from buying second homes, stopping foreign investors from buying property, all that kind of stuff. I think it's a lot also about...
Well, that would help you. So these quite
energy
left-wing policies, would you as a small business owner would...
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good. I think that's really helpful, actually. It's a really helpful insight. So what they're doing is servicing wealth and claiming that they're looking after business. But there's a big difference between wealth and business, because the business is more likely to be you and the last lady than it is to be someone who owns 200 flats from a sovereign fund in Singapore or something like that.
Absolutely. And a lot of these big businesses as well, they don't pay the taxes they should be paying, which is hitting the country a different way. So in a small business, you have to pay everything, and we do. It's a massive tax burden.
It's like being a normal person as opposed to someone who can afford to take advice on legal avoidance of tax, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
And the people.
Absolutely.
You're brilliant. I'm so glad you were listening today, because that's that's such a refreshing voice to hear from somebody with you're doing well, 5 different shops and a decent sized workforce, but enough. I'm going to sound patronising now. I hope not. But looking beyond the end of your nose, Penny, at the bigger economic picture and the multiple challenges that Rachel Reeves faces today. Might catch up with you tomorrow, if that's all right. When we found out when they've let the dog see the rabbit.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Do you want a free advert while you're here? You don't have to take it, but it sounds like you do. Yeah, if you're half as good at flogging frocks as you are at contributing to radio phone-ins, I'd be round there in a flash. Carry on.
TheEditBoutique.com.
Say again?
So with TheEditBoutique.com,
The Edit
we're
Boutique.
5 shops in Cheshire and online as well.
Very nice. One in Knutsford.
Thank you.
One in Northwich.
No, Altrincham, Didsbury, Hale.
Oh, all the posh. Yeah, Hale, Didsbury. Near the what's the pub in Hale? The Griffin, is it in Hale? I'm trying to show off my knowledge of the posh parts of the Northwest, Penny, but it's at least 30 years out of date, so I'll shut up and do this instead.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10 to 12. I didn't notice that the appropriate name of the last caller in Knutsford. Keith spotted it. So if we did catch up with her again tomorrow, and I always forget things like that, and she'll probably be busy anyway, but we could have a new feature and call it In for a Penny, and catch up with Penny and find out, no. This is the stuff that wins awards. Not that I ever win any awards, but if I did win awards, this would be why, because of things like that. In for a Penny, catching up with Penny on Budget Day, and the budget is almost upon us. Natasha will join us for PMQs shortly. Rishi Sunak's very last one. What's O'Brien's Law? What was that? Why are we turning that into a feature? Sorry, I'm having a private conversation with my colleagues again now. I don't. What was it? I've forgotten. I told you. You think I exaggerate? Oh, yeah, that's O'Brien's Law. Any idea I have, I'm turning it into a... Do you know what O'Brien's second law is? I immediately forget it, even before the end of that day's programme. What was the one we were supposed to be doing now? The headlines. I was going to read you a headline. And then misinformation. We even missed information. We even did a competition. Apparently Mateless is recording the what's it called, Keith? The Sting, is it? Mateless is recording the Sting stroke jingle for us, and she's so busy and so important. It'll probably be April 2025. They'll have brought in the new minimum wage before Mateless has a slot in her schedule to minister to my juvenile needs. It's 11:51. Minimum wage. Jack's in Woking. Jack, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I just wanted to talk about the kind of overall situation that I think that employers are in since COVID, with how much overheads have increased. And I mean, you talk about the viability of, how much is too much to take on.
Yes.
But, I mean, just from a small business point of view, we have 3 small businesses, but per site, I mean, our energy.
Surely that adds up to a medium-sized business, Jack.
Yeah, well, our energy per site's gone up by about £2,000 a month.
Yeah.
The COVID loan that we've had to take out to survive is a £500 a month repay. Rent arrears from being closed through COVID, we have to then repay that. Rates
that
going
drives
back
me
up,
nuts.
Increased by about 1,000.
Because that was such a lottery, wasn't it? Some landlords were brilliant about that, and others were absolutely heinous.
Yeah, but I mean, generally speaking, it's £4,000 or £5,000 a month per site that we are poorer, if you like, since the start of COVID. And then when you throw minimum wage or an addition to it, it just becomes, it's quite close to breaking point, I think, because it's very small margins that most businesses work on. And we'll survive it because, I said to your producer, we'll have to put prices up. It's the only way we will be able to, if minimum wage increases, we'll have to price up, which I don't think will help people on minimum wage anyway, because if prices go up everywhere, they're not going to be materially that much better off.
Because they'll be spending their income on the increased prices. But that, I believe, without going all... did a degree at the London School of Economics, brackets, but it was in philosophy, close brackets. That's how economic growth happens.
Sure, but it's whether someone's materially better off for it or not.
It's not,
who's
you
on
see.
minimum
This is the
wage.
problem with using economic growth as the metric, especially using GDP instead of GDP per capita as the metric by which we describe or define growth. But this is a conversation for a different day. You're the second successful business person in a row that has said, listen, it's not great, but we'll be okay. Which, if I were Rachel Reeves, I'd take that as a win. I think, would I?
Well, I think importantly though,
yes.
You know, me and my business partner are quite entrepreneurial people. You know, we've built 3 businesses. We'd look to open another one. Your favourite subject of Brexit also makes it difficult because materials are so much more expensive.
Yes.
If I was looking to open a coffee shop next week, with how much the materials would cost to do the fit out and all these overheads that I now have to incur, I probably wouldn't bother. So it has to hurt growth. It has to, because you can't absorb all these costs with small margins and still have a viable proposition.
Some of those costs are finite, aren't they? You will have paid off your COVID loan at some point. You will have paid off your rent.
Yeah, but that's 10 years. You know, normally you only get a 10-year lease or a 15-year lease. I mean, you know, these are long-term loans that you have to take out. I'm not playing the poverty card.
No, I hear you. This is really helpful. You and Penny have both been the best business people I've spoken to about issues like this in a very long time, because I hope this doesn't sound daft, but you're very human. You don't sound like, you know, mill owners and master sweeps trying to send kids up chimneys. It's about a balance, isn't it, between
I think that's
making it worth your while and looking after your workforce.
I think the wording that often is used is that sort of business owners, it's like everybody's in some, you know, got some big multinational business and driving Ferraris, and it's just not the reality. And I think the thing that's really difficult to get across is the fact that the margins are small. And I don't understand how someone on minimum wage right now is surviving. I really don't.
No,
especially
nor do
not
I.
where we live. I mean, you know, with rent and everything else that's got to go with it. I wish I could pay every single one of my people $50,000 a year so they could have a decent life. I really do.
Of course.
But so it's an impossible situation for everybody, I think. But I think it's just looking at it from a business owner's point of view. I think there's COVID's been so detrimental, and the long-lasting effects of it, that these added increases, we have nowhere to go. We chewed off all the fat through COVID. The only place we have to go is to increase prices. It's our only option.
And that could, as you say, could end up having impacts very different from what Rachel Reeves describes. But I love what you said about the not knowing how you'd survive on the minimum wage, but simultaneously not having much choice commercially, but to pay it. You know, or to pay and indeed to pay more to your staff who are on minimum wage when April 2025 comes around, because that is a really helpful illustration for people who like their news and their analysis and commentary to be honest, nuanced and complicated. That's Rachel Reeves' challenge today. She literally has to do the impossible, and there is no optimal answer. There is no perfect answer. There's no earthly way in which she can do things that allow Jack to pay his staff $50,000 a year and stay open. Can't be done. So that's where these numbers are so interesting, where you just wonder how much is too much. And if I were Rachel Reeves, I'd take as a win the idea that 2 people are telling me that their business is going to be able to do it, but as a loss that Jack is telling me it might make him less likely. In fact, Penny did as well. Penny and Jack got 5 and 3 businesses respectively, albeit that pennies are all in the same sector. And what they need to open more is something that I don't think is going to be in Rachel Reeves' budget today. But of course I could be wrong, because there's always a chance of a rabbit appearing miraculously from a hat. It's coming up to 11:58. We'll start with Sue in Sydenham. This is for Natasha Clark. Sue's been in touch to say, James, are you going through a nervous breakdown?
Are you?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't think I was until I saw Sue's text. But I mean, maybe Sue...
See, what are you referring to?
Maybe Sue knows something that I don't. This is deeply, deeply disturbing. Natasha is here because, of course, PMQs is just around the corner, and it will be Rishi Sunak's swan song.
It will be, and I think, James, it will see a bit more of a sort of sombre affair from Rishi Sunak as he pays farewell to the House of Commons in terms of being leader of the opposition.
And now...
Do you think he'll give a little
goodbye? The time has come. It's time to face the final curtain. That's something like that?
Yeah, I think he'll sing it.
We'll meet again. We'll meet again by
Maybe.
Vera Lynn.
Or, you know.
Do you think...
I was the future once.
There's not
Hasta la
much
vista.
point trying to work out what's going to come up, is there? I don't think he'll jump on the generic-shaped bandwagon with regard to events in Southport. I
highly doubt that.
Because he's a grown-up and he's for all his failings, he's a decent human being and a responsible politician.
Yeah, I'm told that because it's his final Prime Minister's questions, as leader of the opposition, he'll focus on some of the issues that he feels are important to him. So obviously we saw that with the sort of mentions of China and national security from him in the last couple of weeks. I imagine he'll want to talk about the economy and inflation and what he sees as a good record that he's left. Ukraine might be something that he wants to talk about in terms of defence.
He's allowed this sort of
it's his last sort of final swan song, isn't it?
Do you think he regrets becoming Prime Minister? I mean, if you could remove all the baubles and all the reverential treatment he will now receive for the rest of his life, do you think he looks back on it as being a productive and positive period of his professional life?
No, I don't think he'll regret it. I think he sees a sense of duty in doing a big job like that. I think he will wonder whether he was dealt such a bad hand, obviously coming at the end.
If he could hop in a DeLorean sports car and return to 2019, he'd still want to do it. I
think he'd still do it, yeah. I think he probably will regret that
is the problem, isn't it?
He probably will regret that he's become Prime Minister at the end of a long, long line of Tory Prime Ministers that I think he would have probably been a better Prime Minister at a different time in that. If he had the choice to swap up the running order, I don't think he was the right Prime Minister for the right time. But I don't think he'll go back and say, actually, there's loads of mistakes that he made while he was in government.
Do you, except possibly Suella Braverman, but do you think he will be in Parliament by the time the next general election comes round?
I think he'll go before then.
You do think that?
Yeah, I do. He's apparently told colleagues that he's going to stay for the remainder of the Parliament. I'm not sure.
Anthony probably winning our Swan Song Stakes and alluding to what we just discussed by suggesting that his farewell song could be California Dreaming.
Love that.
Lindsay Hoyle is currently warning the House not to talk about the Southport case, which is pertinent to our opening comments to each other today. And that is exactly, the days in which politicians wouldn't need to be cautioned in that kind of space are obviously behind us, hopefully not forever. This is the point in the week where I remind you that as soon as Rishi Sunak, for the final time, as soon as Rishi Sunak gets to his feet, we will cross live to the House of Commons to listen to PMQs. And then we'll do our customary badinage, banter, whatever you prefer, bonhomie. And then Rachel Reeves will get to her feet at approximately 12:30 and deliver the budget, which usually takes about 40 minutes.
I think it's probably going to be close to an hour. I think this will be a pretty long one that she's going to want to get through, but you never know. Depends how many jokes she's got listed in that.
Sheila will slink into the studio at about 12:25. We'll have a three-way conversation. We'll be breaking all sorts of radio rules, all three of us in the same studio at the same time. And then as soon as Rachel Reeves starts talking, I'm off.
That's it. You've got an extra half an hour of your life back.
That's incredible. Makes up for not getting sick pay or holiday pay. It is 1 minute after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQ's ahead of the budget. I wonder, I mean, you'd have to be a bit of an anorak to know whether there has ever been a final PMQs on the day of a budget before. It seems unlikely, doesn't it? That it's been a farewell from a opposition leader on the day that the government is announcing a budget. It's one for the pub quizzes.
I don't think so, as far as I can remember. And this was all the talk, was why we thought that they might shorten the Tory leadership race so that someone like Rishi Sunak wouldn't be responding to the budget. And I thought it was unlikely that he was going to want to stick around for that long. But we all have been completely proved wrong on that point.
I didn't buy that for two reasons. Number one, and I think Daniel Finkelstein or someone has picked up on that today, it's a really tough job responding to a budget statement, and Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick may think that they've got what it takes to do that kind of thing, but the evidence suggests otherwise. And Sunak's been a Chancellor. He's probably the best qualified person on that front bench, including Jeremy Hunt, to respond to a budget statement from Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, he completely is the most qualified person to do that. However, it's not like Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch haven't gone into the House of Commons and stood up and made a speech before and responded at the dispatch box. You know how feisty that she likes to be, and Robert Jenrick
You can't say feisty.
Can I not?
No, because you wouldn't say that about a man. Yeah,
no, you're probably right.
I don't know, me being sexist, mansplaining sexism to you.
Yeah, I think that's right.
A fantastic spiral of sexism and mansplaining.
Okay, if you don't mansplain me, I'll say feisty, and we can call that one a draw.
Call it quits. I had a wonderful missing word round involving Kemi Badenoch, and as is my want at the moment, I've managed to lose it. The reason that she's not...
I should have printed out budget bingo for it.
Yeah, you should actually. Here you go. Do you want to fill in the missing words on this one? Badenoch : that's like the punctuation mark. It's not a story about her stomach. Badenoch : I'm not rude, I have blank. I'm not rude, I have technically blank, blank, blank. I got a message off one of my godsons yesterday. He was listening to the show, and I'd just done a missing word round, and he said, "Hi, Uncle James, just to let you know, I'm listening to your show, and it's blank, 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 blank." He's so cute.
What's the answer?
Badenoch: I'm not rude, I have blank. I'll tell you after PMQs. All right, that's how you do. That's how I can tease that, Natasha.
I'll give you my best guess after PMQs.
No, give me your best guess now.
No.
Let's see if anyone is coming in yet with answers to that. I am not rude, says Cami Badenoch. I have high blank.
You didn't say that in the first one. You said I'm just.
No, I'm not rude. I have.
Oh, I have.
I have blank.
I have high expectations.
I've worked in McDonald's.
I have high expectations.
I'm not rude. I have worked
in
McDonald's.
I'm a hard worker.
I can't read that one out. That's rude.
Doesn't
I have
sound very
opinions,
funny.
says Karen. No, they're not. It's not that funny.
Is it not funny?
Well, it's hilarious what she said, but not intentionally.
I have standards?
Much the same way that I'm not rude. I have blank. Anyway. We're almost done, aren't we? And it's taking a little bit longer than usual. There's some very rude answers coming in, which I wasn't expecting, but I can't read any of them out now in case I accidentally read out one of the accidentally rude, deliberately rude ones. I can't do that. 5 after 12 is the time. PMQs is on the way. The budget follows that. Natasha estimates it will be over an hour, I think, or thereabouts. All of it will be brought to you live on LBC. Why do you think? I mean, the obvious answer is that it's Labour, but I speak as someone who's had 14 years of good news from budgets, and I speak as someone who didn't deserve any of it because I was doing perfectly well before they made my fiscal burden lighter. This one feels different because of things like the minimum wage that we were just discussing. It's a government that will try to help people who arguably need help more.
Yeah, working people. We know that the government are going to prioritise 3 things in this budget.
Hang on, sorry, here it is.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your kind words, and indeed thank you to the Prime Minister for his kind words. Indeed, no Prime Minister looks forward to PMQs, but I always did like this pre-budget one because it was, for a change, nice not to be the main event and just the warm-up act. But as you said, Mr. Speaker, today is my last appearance at PMQs, and I'm happy to confirm reports that I will now be spending more time in the greatest place on earth, where the scenery is worthy. The scenery is indeed worthy of a movie set, and everyone is a character. That's right, Mr. Speaker. If anyone needs me, I will be in Yorkshire. So, and as an adopted Yorkshireman, I'm particularly looking forward to doing the coast-to-coast walk that runs through my constituency and many others. Since 2015, we've made significant progress with a campaign to make it a national trail, and indeed, Natural England are close to concluding their work. So, can I ask the Prime Minister to ensure that the coast-to-coast does indeed become Britain's greatest national trail, and in preparation for my return to the backbenches, would he meet with me to discuss it?
Mr. Speaker, I thought he was about to ask me to join him on the walk. But certainly, I will meet him, and it is an important point.
Mr. Speaker, that is very kind of the Prime Minister. I know he's partial to the Lake District, but perhaps we can tempt him over to our end as well. Now, Yorkshire is not just famous for its walks, but also for being home to some of England's greatest cricketers. Now, sadly, no one's going to put me on that list, Mr. Speaker, but who knows? I've got a lot more time to practice now. So, but cricket does have the power to bring people together from all communities and give them fantastic opportunities, as shown so powerfully by Andrew Flintoff's recent documentary. Yeah. Now, we also lead the world in female participation, and that will stand us in good stead when we host the Women's World Cup in 2026 and when cricket becomes an Olympic sport in 2028. So could I therefore ask the Prime Minister to continue government support for the England and Wales Cricket Board's new initiative to get cricket into vastly more state schools, fostering a whole new generation of cricketers for us all to cheer on at every level?
Yes, is the answer to that question. And the point is a really important one. We celebrate cricket, it does bring communities together, but it's also really important for children and young people to enjoy sport, lots of different sports, because it gives them a confidence that they might not otherwise have. It gives them the ability to work in a team and teaches them about skills like leadership. So I'm fully supportive.
Excellent. Now, Our two predecessors, Sir Tony Blair and Lord Hague, have repeatedly come together and powerfully argued in their joint reports that it is vital for the future prosperity of Britain's economy, society, and public services for us to be a world leader in technology and innovation. Now, the Prime Minister and I may not yet be at our joint report writing stage yet, but in a similar spirit of cross-party agreement, could I ask him to find his inner tech bro and continue to support emerging British tech businesses and establish our country as the home of AI growth and innovation?
Prime Minister.
Yes, and this is a really important point. The Leader of the Opposition held a summit last year on AI, which was very important. We have been bringing together the leaders in AI. We have a huge advantage in this country, being ranked in the top 3 in the world. AI is going to have huge potential for our growth, for our public services, and I think the whole House should be fully supportive of this.
Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister has the immense privilege The Prime Minister has the immense privilege of being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, Northern Ireland is a special part of our union, but one that needs particular care, attention and respect. Having a strong functioning assembly at Stormont is good for the people of Northern Ireland and good for our union. And that's why I was so pleased to see government restored there earlier this year, and I'm grateful to him for his support with that. So can he assure the House that he will continue to work to keep Stormont open, delivering for the Northern Irish people and strengthening Northern Ireland's place in our union?
Prime Minister.
Yes, and again, this is a really important point and one that matters to me personally. I worked for 5 years in Northern Ireland on some of the proposals under the Good Friday Agreement, in particular the transformation of the RUC into the Police Service of Northern Ireland. I worked with both communities there. It was for 5 years. It was very important to me, had a huge impact on me, and so I care deeply about Northern Ireland, and I absolutely agree that the institutions government needs to be up and running and want to give all support I can to the further development in Northern Ireland.
Now, as Prime Minister, he will be acutely aware of the threats that our United Kingdom faces from an axis of authoritarian states, Iran, North Korea, Russia and China. And in particular, I'm proud of the way that this House has united in standing up to Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I know that we will never waver in our commitment to the Ukrainian cause. Now, I will always be grateful for the support that he gave me when we were the first country to send Ukraine Western battle tanks, long-range missiles, and the first to offer security assurances to Kyiv. So in light of the threats that we face, can I urge him to always maintain the strength of the transatlantic alliance and ensure that NATO remains the bedrock of Western security, with the United Kingdom playing a leading role?
Yes, and NATO is, in my view, as important today as the day in which it was created, in light of the challenges that we face. And it was a Labour government that was the proud co-founder of NATO, and we've repeatedly said we support NATO to the hilt.
Well, finally, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is Diwali. And I became leader of my party during Diwali, and I now stand down during that same festival. So I'm proud to have been the first British Asian Prime Minister, but I was even prouder that it was not that big a deal. And that speaks volumes about the values of the British people, of our country, and of this Parliament. So will the Prime Minister join me in applauding the kindness, decency and tolerance that has always been the British way?
Yes, and I meant what I said when I said that we were all proud to see him standing there as Prime Minister, representing our diverse country. We were all proud. I think everybody in this House was. So I thank him for that. And his last question, final question as Leader of the Opposition, although judging by the speed with which his party goes through leaders, he may be back here before too long, but in the meantime, I'm sure he'll be a great champion for the people of Richmond. But Mr. Speaker, finally, I'm sure he won't mind me disclosing to the House the contents of a letter that he wrote to me this week. My answer to it is clear. Yes, I will arrange for him to meet the relevant minister about the A66 that runs through his constituency.
Dave Begg-Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in Hackney, nearly 4,000 children who could fill 8 primary schools are in temporary accommodation, many outside London. This is bad for their future opportunities. It's ripping apart our communities. I welcome the government's pledge to build new homes, but will he ensure that those who cannot have a roof over their head are a top priority in that long queue for new housing?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for raising this issue. It is a source of national shame that there are just under 1.3 million households on a social housing waiting list, including, I think, 8,000 of them in Hackney. The best way to tackle overcrowding and meet housing need is to build the homes this country needs, and that's why we will deliver the 1.5 million homes over this Parliament, and the Chancellor will set out further details in just a moment.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with your remarks and the remarks of the Prime Minister about the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Richmond and Northallerton, and thank him for his service and wish him and the whole country a happy Diwali. Despite our political differences, I've always felt a certain kinship since the general election, when he was the only other party leader to get as wet as I did. I'm looking forward to debating the budgets with him and the Chancellor shortly, but can I wish him and his family all the best for the future. Mr. Speaker, next month's summit in Baku is a chance for the UK to regain world leadership on climate change, a role disastrously lost under the Conservatives. As this is the final summit before countries must ratchet up their new Paris agreements before 2035, will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to seize back world leadership on climate change by committing today to support the targets set out this week by the Independent Climate Change Committee and publish a programme to deliver on those?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will seize that initiative. We've reset on the international stage, and climate is one of the biggest challenges that we face. I will be going to the conference this year, as I went in fact last year as leader of the opposition, to continue those discussions about how we reach the very important targets that we must reach.
Shred David.
I thank the Prime Minister for his reply. I hope we can really take that world leadership back again. Another issue which the UK needs to show urgent leadership on is the escalating war in Sudan. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. 11 million Sudanese have had to flee from their homes, Mr. Speaker. The reports of mass killings and horrifying sexual violence against women are truly stomach-churning. So when the UK takes over presidency of the UN Security Council this Friday, will the Prime Minister make it a priority to secure a new resolution on preventing future atrocities, including a no-fly zone to stop the Iranian drones?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this because it is an important issue, and I don't think we discuss it enough in this House. We continue to see mounting evidence of appalling atrocities against civilians and unacceptable restrictions on humanitarian access, and working with international partners, including as penholder, as he knows, at the UN Security Council to end the violence, secure humanitarian access and ensure the protection of civilians is a major priority.
Rachel Baswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is this Labour government...
17 minutes after 12 is the time. Natasha and I will pick over the bones of what we've just heard, although there's not a lot to pick over, really. Karen puts it best when she writes, get a room. But we'll do that anyway. And then, of course, it's budget-tastic time. We're taking the whole thing in full. Sheila Fogarty will join me before Rachel Reeves gets to her feet, and I will hand over the baton of presentation to her, and you'll hear the entire budget, and then you'll hear expert analysis thereof in the immediate aftermath. So there's about 1 million reasons to stay tuned to LBC for the rest of the day. Swarbrick will be with you now. Ben Kent is standing in for Swarbrick at 4:00 as well, steering you through, giving you a younger man's perspective on budgetary matters.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 12. We missed, I don't know. It's just lots of people. Well, you're divided between being a little bit sick in your mouth and being strangely moved by the warmth that was on display there between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. I'll tell you something for nothing. It wouldn't have happened if it was Boris Johnson. I don't think there was any love lost between Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson.
They really didn't like each other, did they?
No, not least because Keir Starmer played Boris Johnson like an old fiddle when it came to the barrister in him leading Boris Johnson into self-recrimination, which of course ultimately saw him leaving the House of Commons altogether. Why can't they do it like this every week, says Lee, like the last 2 weeks? Sensible conversation with the silly boy behaviour and jeering gone. Tony says, I'm loving PMQs today. There's a lot of nice banter and it shows that not all our politicians are the same. It's nice to see Rishi Sunak looking relaxed and Keir Starmer showing mutual respect. And Karen says, get a room. Joe says, mutual back scratch, James. A few quick answers to my missing word round with Cami Badenoch, which was... I'm not rude, says Cami Badenoch. I have blank. This is probably my favourite from Lindsay. Chills. They're multiplying. Brian says, I'm not rude. I'm just a very horrible person. Robert, I'm not rude. I have supreme burger skills. That's quite a nice one. Lots of those.
I hope she would.
She did.
She
I
would
don't know whether she does anymore.
I've
inevitably lost the story, but I think I can. Oh no, here it is. Badenoch says, I'm not rude. I have. Sheila, do you want to have a go?
I'm not rude. I have to be softer.
Oh, if only. That level of self-awareness. No, I have high tolerance. I have high stress tolerance. You'll have to read the article.
High stress tolerance.
I'm not rude. I have high stress tolerance.
What she means is I have high standards, doesn't she? She means that she wants to think that you.
But if you have
tough.
high stress tolerance, you would probably be more polite in the face of people behaving like idiots.
I would think so. You would think so. But she says, I treat people how I treat myself.
So she's quite harsh on herself, is what she means.
I presume that's a bit like Dobby, is it, in the Harry Potter films? Silly Dobby. I don't know. I mean, anyway, we digress. You may have noticed Sheila Fogarty has joined us in the studio.
I treat people. Can I just go on that as well? I treat people like I treat myself. What if they don't want to be treated like that?
That's unlucky.
There's no question of how somebody else wishes to be treated.
Aren't we all harsher on ourselves than other people?
I am, definitely.
Everybody is.
We're Catholics, though.
Except for people who play their music loudly on trains, and I'm vicious to them.
I just think I'm saying something that I wouldn't mind hearing back. I treat people how I treat myself. I've had even some of my advisors saying, why did you say that? So this is in response to accusations, perhaps, that she's rude to other people, but she claims she simply has a higher tolerance for criticism than most.
Herself.
I see.
So she expects it of others.
You know, the phrase is treat others how you would like to be treated.
Not how you are.
Not how you are treated, right?
I am not rude, says James. I have fixed the ice cream machine, which is a reference back to McDonald's.
Ah, there we go. Very good.
And quite a clever reference, quite a niche reference, actually, back to McDonald's. There's not a lot to say about what we just heard.
No, I've just all of my notes from the Prime Minister's questions consist of a lot of love hearts and just all doodling all over my notepad, lots of love hearts. But yes, that was a very calm Prime Minister's questions. I personally don't think that they achieve anything really, James, when they go quite so soft on each other. It might be more, the public might like to see our politicians be a bit more kind, a bit more respectful, but actually that's not the point of this. The point of it is to hold the government of the day's feet to the fire, and I enjoyed seeing Keir Starmer and I enjoy seeing Rishi Sunak press the Prime Minister of the day on specific issues, and I think actually it's fair enough. I'll give Rishi Sunak this. It's his final Prime Minister's question. He wants to talk about things like we heard just then, AI, on Russia, Ukraine, maintaining a strong NATO. He's talking about how he's the first Asian Prime Minister, but he thought it wasn't a big deal. That was quite nice.
That was lovely.
You're talking about female participation, cricket, grassroots sport, lots of, like you say, back scratching, tummy tickling, as we might say, and a nice joke from Keir Starmer at the end, talking about how he will make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss the A66, which runs through his constituency. So lots of jokes there. But yes, I don't particularly feel that they actually achieve much with these Prime Minister's questions when they go that way.
The A19 at the moment, which is actually in that neck of the woods, but I haven't succeeded in getting a caller this week from somebody who could talk to me about why the A19 has been adjudged the finest road.
We can send a reporter there.
The finest road in the land. I
can go if you like.
It'll work on the radio?
Yes.
I do too.
Nice little sound package.
I do too. Do you know, you've just reminded me of something. I intended, Sheila, to break the habit of a lifetime yesterday and open the programme with an intelligent observation. But I forgot.
High time.
But I know, you're telling me. But I forgot. And it was while watching Donald Trump in America and were he to win, what is likely to happen to the process of scrutiny and accountability. And I was reminded that for all the jip that we give it, PMQs is an extraordinary exercise in scrutiny and accountability. And that you could imagine that, the President of America being compelled weekly to answer specific and repeated questions about his own conduct.
And be seen to be incapable of doing so by the rest of us, if that's the case.
Yes, exactly that. But we shouldn't be talking about that. We should be talking about what's coming up on this radio station after 12:30 today.
Which is the budget. It starts in a few minutes. You will have full coverage of it live on Global Player. We'll have instant reaction here with me, Sheila Fogarty, and in the studio, as you've heard already, is LBC's political editor Natasha Clark. We'll listen through to it live with you together and then talk about it straight afterwards. The Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, Danny Sriskandarajah, will be with us on hand to help with any of your budget questions. Obviously, we want your thoughts as well on 0345 6060 973. You can also go online at lbc.co.uk/budget to follow our live blog and coverage. And Natasha, while we wait for the Chancellor to take to her feet, and we're told that there's a tradition, isn't there, that the Chancellor has a sherry or an alcoholic drink or a little beer or something.
They haven't done that for a long time. I can't remember when the last time I saw a Chancellor have an alcoholic tipple on the side.
Don't they leave it underneath the dispatch box, as I understand? Well, she's not going to today, I read.
She's not going to.
Clark definitely had a tipple, I think, back in the day.
Back in the day, what we're talking 25 years ago now.
If he had his way, he'd have had a big cigar as well, wouldn't it?
Not these days, especially if she's going to put booze taxes up. She's not going to be swinging from the bottle, is she?
Well, she has two audiences at the very least here, doesn't she? When she gives this announcement, she'll have the likes of us, as in citizens, to please or not, or displease, but she'll be very conscious of the markets as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they already have been a bit spooked, I think, by the news that she's going to be borrowing billions of pounds of extra money to pay for capital investment, something that George Osborne and previous Tory chancellors have completely ripped up. But actually, it has already started to lead to higher gilt prices and could lead to borrowing costs going up. And it could even have an impact on interest rates too. Who knows? It's something she'll be aware of to watch, which is why I think she chose to pre-announce that in her meetings with the IMF a couple of days ago to try and sort of soften the blow of any big Liz Truss style mini market meltdowns. And, she'll be watching carefully to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Nice to see Mark Francois on his feet in the House of Commons. Sorry, I just thought I'd interject. Yeah. I'm still presenting this programme.
Are you?
Well, yeah, technically.
I thought I'd taken over.
Have you taken over now?
There's been a coup.
Okay. As soon as
you're very welcome on my
Rachel Reeves gets to her feet, we will cross live to the House of Commons, and then I am done. And we will return to the Sheila Fogarty experience as soon as Rachel Reeves sits down again.
What is it you'd like to say on my programme in the remaining minutes?
I just wanted to say how nice it was to see Mark Francois back on his feet.
Is that your final remark of the day?
He's sitting down again.
Is that really what you want your final remark of the day to be, James?
Right, we're seeing some fidgeting, and Rachel Reeves is on her feet. I'm not sure it's necessarily as speedy as just walking towards the dispatch box. Maybe it will be.
Swapping out speaker. So this means, she's about to kick
start.
off.
And just while we wait for it to start in earnest, because she's seated again, I think. Yes, she is. That whole question of tax rises. That's already been, that kite has been flown as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. Yeah, I mean, Rachel Reeves admitted to the Newsagents podcast back in the summer that she was going to have to raise taxes in this budget. And interestingly, hearing from Keir Starmer on Monday, I think his language completely has flipped this week. He's now talking about how he's going to have to raise those taxes to pay for the NHS. He's trying to make that argument that he thinks that that's worth it. He thinks that it is worth raising our taxes to fix the foundations, as he says, and to fix the NHS, to put more into our public services. Do the public agree? Are they willing and able to have higher taxes in order to pay for it? We're about to find out.
And the first female Chancellor, of course.
Yeah,
which may or may not seem significant to people. I think it's worthy of note.
I think the Deputy Speaker, Natasha, is telling off the government for releasing too much information about the budget. I think that's what the kids call prees, isn't it?
It is the prees, yes.
And they load up before going out and paying retail prices.
That's a really good way of saying the prees.
It's not pre-briefing either. I'm going to get pedantic now. It's because it's briefing.
Yeah, it is.
It's pre-budget briefing, but it's not pre-briefing because it can't pre-brief. You can only brief.
It's pre-briefing and announcement.
No, it's pre-budget briefing.
Pre-budget briefing,
yeah.
Fine.
Briefing is pre-budget.
But look, I think this is...
I told you it was boring.
Is he still here?
It's 32, you can leave if you like, James.
I'm not allowed to, contractually.
Okay, well, in that case, we can carry on talking about, the fact that so much of this has been pre-briefed out. Again, I think this is a move to calm the markets, to calm businesses, and to calm the party, to try not to
Especially
get
the
any of
bond
them.
markets after what happened with Liz Truss.
Exactly.
Test for you, seeing as you've mocked me for my historical knowledge of politics.
Go on.
Who was the Chancellor who had to fall on his sword after releasing one tiny element of his budget?
Oh, I knew, but I've forgotten.
Same.
Is this the one where the Evening Standard accidentally revealed it?
Yes.
80s?
Oh, longer ago than that, I think. 70s, I'd say. Hugh Dalton.
Good pub quiz question.
It is a good pub quiz question.
That.
So is, who was the outgoing leader of the Conservative Party, who was the only outgoing leader of a party to have his last day at PMQs on the same day as a budget?
Is it Rishi Sunak?
Yes, it is. It's fantastic.
There you go.
Is it ever going to start?
No, she's still ticking them off.
While we're waiting for it to start, minimum wage is or living wage, depending on what people call it, is going to go up to $12.21. I think is it? Yeah, $12.21 an hour. And we know that, or we think we know, that employers' national insurance is going to go up as well. I was listening to somebody from the food sector this morning saying that the food supply chain could be affected by that. I think she's on her feet now, the Chancellor.
Here it is.
James O'Brien on LBC.